Hi there, and welcome to another video of CodeRash with Gaurav. In today's video, we're going to talk about a little infamous thing about JavaScript. And by this time, you have already read in the description of this video. Yes, we are going to talk about prototypes and inheritance in JavaScript. Learning this could be a little bit tricky, and that is why JavaScript is not a language everybody likes. So let's demystify once for all what is prototype, and let's get started. In this video, we're going to talk about what is prototype, what is __ proto, and what is prototype, the hidden property of an object, because these can be very confusing when they are used interchangeably. We'll also look at what is inheritance and what is prototype chain in JavaScript. Let us see what is a prototype. Whenever you create an object in JavaScript, a hidden property is created within that object and which points to its prototype. Now, to understand what is prototype, we must understand that in JavaScript, we mostly deal with objects. Almost everything that we create is an object. The exceptions are with elementary types like string, a variable holding a number or a character. Such variables are not objects or references. Otherwise, mostly the variables that we create, like an array, no matter how we create an object as a literal or object using constructor function, even the functions themselves, everything is an object. Now, all of these objects would have this prototype created, which points to another object. And the base class from which each and every object is created is the capital O object. And it will have its own prototype. So whenever you create an object in JavaScript, the prototype by default will start pointing to Object.prototype, no matter what kind of object you are creating. It can be a function, it can be an array or anything. It will start automatically pointing to Object.prototype. Now consider this example. We are having an object 1 and its prototype is pointing to another object. Now this object could be Object.prototype from which everybody is inheriting or which everybody is pointing to. Otherwise, this could have been a custom object that you created, and we'll see in this video only how do we do that. So in this example, Object1.prototype is pointing to object 2. Now prototype is not just about pointing to some object, it also brings along a lot of functionality. So in this case, if you see, object 1 had a property of its own, which is A, and object 2 had some properties of its own, which is B and C. So when I say object1.c, I get 3. And this is only possible because object1.prototype was pointing to object 2. Now this is some kind of an inheritance. Whatever was there in object 2, I automatically got access of those properties in object 1. This is how prototypal inheritance works in JavaScript. So it is not just a reference, it also brings along the properties which are there in object 2. And we'll see that in a real life example. Whatever we just talked about, that whenever you create an object, you get a hidden property called as prototype. Let us verify that fact. And for doing that, we'll create an object, let's say obj, and let us define just one property inside that, which is A. Let us give it a value 1. Now let us see what is there in our obj. It has a key, which is A, and the value is 1, which is what we defined. Now if we expand this, you should see a hidden property which is called as prototype, and it is pointing to an object. Now what is that object? This object is the base prototype of the object as a function or object constructor, which you can also call as the base object class. So to verify this fact that this property prototype is a hidden property and we cannot access this, let us try accessing it. I will say prototype, and let me see if I am able to access this. I cannot access this because this is not a valid syntax. So the hidden property is not accessible directly. Now let us see how does some extra functionality gets embedded into obj which we did not define. Now what we will do is, let us see what is there in obj. Obj just has a key, which is A. We did not add any method or any kind of functionality to obj yet. Now I can say obj dot value of. Now if I say value of, it gives me the value of object. Now in this object, I did not define a member function which says value of, but I am still able to say object.value of. This is possible because obj has a prototype which is pointing to the base class, which is object, and its prototype. Let us look at what is there in Object.prototype. Now Object.prototype brings us a lot of functionality which we are indirectly inheriting into obj. Whatever is there in the object.prototype automatically comes to obj, and we can use that as is. So this sets an expectation that whenever you are creating an object, that object is going to have a prototype which is going to be a hidden property. We'll see how can we access that property later in this video, but there is a prototype created, and that prototype is going to point to an object which can be a custom object as well. But if you don't define a custom object as a prototype, it will start pointing to object, the base class prototype by default. That is why on object I was able to do object.value of. Now this should make you wonder that because I did not define any member function over there, how come I am able to do object.value of? Because how come this functionality came into obj? That is because of the object.prototype. It has all those functionalities defined, and we inherited that in the obj. Now let us also see that how do we define prototypes? Like, what are prototypes? Are prototypes a pointer or references to another object, or is that a copy, or is there a fresh copy of prototype created inside obj? Let us try to verify that. So to verify that, what we'll do is we'll say object.prototype.x. Let us define a property on the base object prototype. Now from obj I have a prototype which is pointing to object.prototype, and now whatever is available in object.prototype should automatically come to obj. Now if I am able to say obj.x and I get 1, this is possible only because obj had a prototype which was pointing to object.prototype, and any change in object.prototype also impacts obj. This is how inheritance works in JavaScript. This is prototypal inheritance. We saw that whenever we create an object, a prototype is created and which is pointing to object.prototype by default. And whenever you create an object, you can also say that a prototype should be pointing to a custom object, and that custom object, obj2 in this case, would be having a prototype which is pointing to another custom object. So let us see where does this chain end and what is this prototype chain. So whenever you define an object, by default the prototype is the object.prototype, and this chain ends at null. So object.prototype also points to some prototype which is null. Now if you say that I am defining an object whose prototype should point to another custom object which I only defined, so this creates a chain. Now this is also called as prototype chain, and which is ultimately nothing but inheritance in JavaScript. So when I create an object, I can say that it should point to another object through its prototype, and that object might be pointing to another object, and ultimately that object will be pointing to object.prototype, and object.prototype points to null. So this creates a prototype chain. Now this also allows us to bring in all the functionalities from the entire hierarchy. So let's say that object.prototype, at this level I had couple of properties, at this level I had 2 more, and at this level I had, let's say, a couple of more properties. So at this point, if I say that what all properties are available in this particular object, they will be this plus this plus this. Like whatever functionality is available in my entire prototype chain, this will be available here. And this is how prototypal inheritance works in JavaScript. Same goes with the case with array.prototype. Like if you create a new array, that array object will start pointing to array.prototype, and array.prototype will point to object.prototype, and it goes to null. So whenever you are trying to access a property from an object, what JavaScript engine does for us is, like, first of all, it will look in that object itself. Does the property is available in that object directly or not? If it is not, it will start traversing up the prototype chain till it reaches null. And if it is found in that prototype chain, it will give you the value of that key in an object. Otherwise, it will return you undefined. And what we just saw is called as prototype chain. So null sits at the top of the prototype chain, and just below that object.prototype, and below that you can have your own custom definitions. You may want to have your custom inheritance defined, that you can do at the level below object.prototype. So this is basically called as prototype chain, and this is the core functionality because of which inheritance or prototypal inheritance is possible in JavaScript. Before we jump into the real life example, we go to coding. I just want to cover one important topic here, that we saw that a prototype is an internal hidden property of an object, this one. Now there is an accessor for this which is called as underscore underscore proto. So difference between these two is often confusing, so don't get confused. There is a simple rule that prototype in the square brackets, this is an internal hidden property of an object, and how do you access this is through underscore underscore proto. So there is no difference between these two. Underscore underscore proto gives us a way to access object.prototype. That's it. So whenever you create an object, prototype property will be created, and underscore underscore proto will give us a way to access that. So this is as simple as that. Let us now jump into code and see what we just did. So we are going to create a prototype chain through using the accessor property underscore underscore proto. So let us first define an object which is of let's say obj1, and we are going to say it has two properties, a and b. Let's say a is 1 and b is 2. Let us define another object obj2 which has two properties, let's say c 3 and d as 4. Now at this point obj1 dot proto dot underscore underscore proto, now that we know that we can use underscore underscore proto to get to the prototype. Now we see here this is the object prototype, and this should be as similar as what obj2 got. So if I say obj2 dot underscore underscore proto, I should get the same thing. This is the object dot prototype, because yet I have not defined any custom prototype definition. Now at this time what I can do is I can say obj2 dot underscore underscore proto equals to obj1. Now if I look at obj2, let us see how does our obj2 looks like. So in obj2 by default we define two properties, which is c and d, and if you look at its prototype now is pointing to obj1 which has two properties, a and b, and then it further has a prototype which is the object prototype, the base object prototype. Now at this point this is how our prototype chain looks like. obj2 points to obj1, and which further points to object.prototype. This is how our prototype chain looks like. Now let us see does our inheritance work as we expected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a couple of more properties at the object.prototype level. Let's say x equals to 9 and object.prototype.y equals to 10. Now because of this prototype chain, what I'm going to see over here is object.prototype, whatever properties it had should become available in object1, and whatever properties object1 had should become available in object2. So I should be able to say object2 dot x, this guy gives me 9. Also let us see if we are able to access properties from object1 internally from object2. So let us say object2 dot a, this guy gives me 1. Now this guy had x and y, this guy had a and b, and this guy had c and d. Now everything is available in object2. This is how inheritance works in JavaScript. So this is prototype chain, and this we were able to do because of this particular statement. We were able to override the prototype of an object which was automatically created. The prototype was automatically created for object2 and which was pointing to object.prototype. Now at this time you understood that this is how inheritance works, but this is not a recommended way, that you should not be overwriting the prototype directly. There is another way of inheritance in JavaScript which ultimately modifies prototype, but this is not recommended. Like this will have some performance implications, and this is not a recommended way at all. You should not be touching the underscore underscore proto or the internal hidden property of an object which is prototype via underscore underscore proto directly. You should not be playing with that. So how this could have been done is something like this. We could have said let obj3 equals to object.create, and we could have specified a prototype, let us say obj1. Now let us see what is there in obj3. obj3 has no property of its own, but let us see what its prototype points to. Its prototype points to object1. Now I should be able to say obj3 dot a and I get 1. So object.create is another way of creating objects through the prototype of another object, which we did by overriding underscore underscore proto, but that is not recommended at all. Now let us look at prototype chain here. Object2 is pointing to object1. Object1's prototype, let us see what it is. Object1 dot underscore underscore proto. This guy should point to x and y, which is object.prototype, because we defined at the object.prototype level two properties, which is x and y. So this is pointing to object.prototype. Now let us see at this point what our object.prototype looks like. This has the two custom properties that we defined, and let us see what its prototype points to. So object.prototype is another object we saw, and let us see what its prototype points to. So we'll say underscore underscore proto of object.prototype itself, and we'll get to null. So this is what we just saw in the theory also. Null sits at the top of the prototype chain, and you can have object.prototype below that, and then you can have your custom object definition. Now we also see if we are able to say object, let us do this way. We have object1 defined, which has a and b. Now at this time object1's prototype points to object.prototype. Let me try to get a random key out of this. Object1 dot, let's say p. Now p is undefined because this is not available anywhere in the prototype chain. So like we just discussed in our theory, that whenever you are trying to access a property out of an object, JavaScript engine will try to find that property throughout the prototype chain if it is not found in the object itself. So, and ultimately it reaches null. So as soon as it reaches null in the prototype chain, it will declare that the property is not found and it will return undefined. So far in this video we saw what is prototype, the internal hidden property, how can we access that internal hidden property using underscore underscore proto, what is object.prototype, how does it point to null, creating a prototype chain, and how does prototypal inheritance works in JavaScript using this prototype chain. Now one important topic I want to cover before we wrap up this video is the use of this prototype as a keyword. Now many times you will be able to do something dot prototype as well directly. Now let us see in what cases that is possible. So understand this as a golden rule. This should avoid any kind of confusion, that whenever you are creating an object, it will have a private property prototype, and you can access the prototype of that using underscore underscore proto. Whenever you are defining a function, whenever you declare a function in JavaScript, for that function a public property is created, which is called as prototype. So if you want to access prototype of a constructor function, a function that you define, you will have to use the property called as prototype. Now let us see that as an example. Let us create a function. Let us say function abc. This, let's say this has two properties, two public member properties, which are x equals to 1, and let's say this dot y equals to 2. Okay, now let us see how can we access the prototype of abc. Now I can say abc dot prototype, and notice here that abc is a function and it has a constructor as well. Now abc would have had its prototype generated, and we are accessing the prototype of abc using dot prototype, not through underscore underscore proto. So this is a case with functions. Whenever you declare a function, a prototype property is attached to the function, and you can use that to access its prototype. Now if we say we want to instantiate this function and create an object out of it, so let us say let obj equals to new of abc. Now obj dot x I should be able to say and get the value 1. Now let's see how can we modify the prototype of abc. So what we can do is abc dot prototype, let us attach another property, say l, and I'm going to say the value to be 10. Now, because I modified the prototype of ABC and from which obj was instantiated, obj should also get that property. So I should be able to say obj dot L and I should be able to get 10. So this is how you modify the prototype of a function. Unlike objects where you were using __ proto, for functions you can directly use dot prototype. In this video we saw what is prototype in JavaScript, what is prototypal inheritance, and what is prototype chain. I hope this video was able to explain you in brief about all these concepts, and also I'll be dropping in some more resources in the video description. Go check them out as well. I'll be bringing you more of such content of basics of JavaScript and for free on this channel. The least you can do is subscribe to this channel, leave a like if you like this video, and share this video with your friends. Do let me know in the comments what all topics I can cover and what you are interested in knowing about. And I'll see you in the next one.